Hello everyone, how have you been doing? My name's TryPokemac and I've been doing pretty good myself. Welcome back. Today we're going to be playing through Pokemon Blue, but I have to change my team every time I beat a gym. The rules are simple. I can only catch one Pokemon per route, only one member of each species. I can set aside a Pokemon for later use, and after every gym, every Pokemon on my team has to go in the box. Stick around after the challenge is actually over because I'm going to have a fair amount of things to say about it. Like last time, all my nicknames are going to follow the same theme. If you think you can guess it, comment down below. If you're correct, I'll interact with your comment. If you have any ideas for future themes, please comment down below. If I use it, I will credit you in the video. One last thing before we get into the challenge. Pokemon Red ended up being a bit easier than I thought it was going to be, but I'm kind of glad it was. I want these challenges to be something anyone could do or anyone could put their own spin on. I don't want to make it seem like you can only do a challenge with a paragraph of rules in fine print. I want people to play games the way they want to without worrying that someone will say, that's too easy. What may be too easy for one person may be the perfect level of difficulty for another. But like I said, I do intend to slowly increase the difficulty of these challenges as time goes. With that message out of the way, let's just get straight into it. Welcome back to camp. Just like last time, I wake up in my room in Pallet Town, but I make sure to say bye to my mom before going and meeting Professor Oak at his lab. In his lab, I grab the Bulbasaur and name him Michael. After choosing our starters, my rival and I decided to have a brief debate whether Tackle or Scratch was the better move. While my rival did make some good points with his Charmander, ultimately, Michael and I came out on top. With that victory in our minds, we went and caught a Pidgey on Route 2 who we named Leather. After catching Leather, I went and caught a Rattata on Route 22, who I named Billy. After that, I put Michael in the PC and kept Leather and Billy on my team, where I went up to Viridian Forest and caught Adelaide the Caterpie. Having caught every Pokemon I can in this section, I leveled my entire team up to 9. In the process, this allowed Adelaide to evolve into Metapod. I met my rival on Route 22, and we began our battle by throwing our birds against each other until one stopped moving. For the first 2 turns of the battle, his Pidgey was able to outspeed mine, while we both went for Gust each turn. However, on the 3rd turn, I ended up outspeeding, meaning we had a speed tie. He went for Sand Attack, which meant that on the next turn, even though he outsped me again, I was still able to go for game with my 4th Gust. Charmander came out second, and I brought out Billy. And then I just spammed Quick Attack for the entire battle. He tried to get me to minimum attack using Growls, but by the time he started scratching, it was already too late. Even if he could beat Billy, either of my reserve Pokemon would have been ready to beat Charmander. However, Billy was able to pull through, so it didn't matter. After losing count of the amount of Quick Attacks I had used, Charmander finally went down, and my team was ready for their final challenge, beating Brock. Before battling Brock, I made sure everyone was level 14, which meant Adelaide evolved into Butterfree. I also put my entire hopes for the gym on Adelaide because they were the only member of my team that had a move that wasn't resisted. I know from past experience that this Geodude is not much of a threat, but can whittle down your health enough that Onix becomes a threat. With that in mind, I chose to open with Billy against his Geodude and spam Hyper Beam until the rock would go down. Which after several Hyper Fangs and a critical hit, it did, forcing Brock to bring out his Onix, and I began to slowly use Tail Whip in order to bring his defense down. I know that Confusion does special damage, but I wanted to make sure to lower his physical defense low enough that if I needed to swap into one of my physical attackers, they had the best chance of finishing the job. I also wanted to give Adelaide a clean switch, but Onix wasn't attacking, so after several turns of nothing, I switched on Abide and swapped to Leather and used Sand Attack to lower its accuracy. Onix may not have high attack, but I wanted to give Adelaide the best shot at beating it. So, after lowering its accuracy by 2 stages, I swapped into Adelaide. I chose to use Confusion, which did about a third of his health. I didn't realize he was on Abide and wasn't really thinking, so I went for a second Confusion that took him down to 2/3 health. Adelaide ended up feigning by taking the Bite attack. So I swapped to Leather, and after a low roll attack and then a very high roll quick attack, Onix went down, netting me the Boulder Badge and forcing me to box my first team. With the Boulder Badge in hand, I set out and grabbed a Spearow who I named Jigsaw. I bought a Magikarp who I named Samara. Then, when I ventured into Mount Moon, I caught a Zubat named Damien. At the end of the tunnel, I grabbed the Helix fossil, and then outside, I caught a Sandshrew who I named Pinhead. I fought Hero 4v4 in front of Nugget Bridge, then crossed it and grabbed a Bellsprout who I named Morph. After saving Bill, I dropped off Samara and Jigsaw on the PC so I could save them for later. Out of game, I'll be up front. I kept Sandshrew on the team because I don't like Sandshrew and I wanted to get it off the team as soon as possible. It's not my least favorite Pokemon by any means. If you like Sandshrew, good on you. I absolutely adore Alolan Sandslash. My least favorite Pokemon's actually the Dunsparce. Pinhead the Sandshrew actually blew my expectations out of the water during the Misty Gym, so I kind of have to reconsider my bias towards it. Speaking of, let's get right into the Misty fight. Not expecting much out of Pinhead, I went for my best move Slash against Misty's Staryu. I was lucky and Slash got a critical hit, depleting a significant portion of Staryu's health, which I was then able to deplete on the next turn when Misty used an X defense instead of going for the knockout. Then Starmie finished Pinhead off with Bubble Beam and I swapped to Damien. I wasted the first 2 turns that Damien was on the field going for Supersonic when I had access to Confuse Ray. But as soon as Supersonic landed and Starmie was confused, I swapped to the offensive and used Bite against Starmie until it switched from using Tackle to Bubble Beam, knocking Damien out. With only one Pokemon left, I swapped to Morph. Starmie got off a critical hit Tackle, while I got off a Vine Whip that almost knocked it out, but not wanting to deal with another critical hit, I swapped to Wrap and immobilized Starmie for the last 2 turns, beating Misty and earning myself the Cascade badge. I'm just going to show here. I caught a Meowth south of Celadon. I never use it. I did put it in the PC with the expectation of using it on my championship team, but things happened, so I ended up kind of forgetting about it by the end. He's in my team for the SSN rival fight, so when you see it, you'll notice that I actually have 4 Pokemon there, but he never actually got used. I'll explain what happened that made me forget about him later, just know that I had things happen, so hopefully you can forgive me. I will use a Meowth in the future just to make up for this. Once I made it to Vermilion City, I traded Jigsaw the Spearow for Dux the Farfetch'd. By Arceus, Dux ended up being the absolute MVP of this run, because whenever I didn't have a Pokemon on hand, I could use him. He knows Cut, Fly, and can learn Swords Dance, which meant he could set up, sweep, basically anything. So whenever I didn't have a Pokemon for that section, I could use him as my catcher or to battle trainers so I could get another Pokemon. After that, I went to Route 11 and caught the much less important Pennywise the Drowsy and Babadook the Diglett before I took on the SSN. Dux didn't have access to Swords Dance yet, so my strategy relied on Fury Attack. Fury Attack already has pretty bad accuracy, but it was made worse by Pidgeotto spamming Sand Attack over and over. I got really frustrated during this fight because of that, but luckily, at the literal last second, Dux got off consecutive Fury Attacks, knocking Pidgeotto out. I wasn't thinking straight by this point, so I didn't sack off Dux when I should have, so Pennywise took unnecessary damage on switch in. Luckily enough, Quick Attack's normal damage wasn't enough to really phase Pennywise, so after a few confusions, Raticate fell. I think I tried to sack off Pennywise against Kadabra, but Pound did way more damage than Confusion did, and Kadabra barely used it, so in the end, Pennywise got 2 knockouts and I never even brought out Jason. Finally, Charmeleon was easily able to defeat the already weakened Pennywise, so I swapped into Babadook the Diglett and with 1 dig, knocked out Charmeleon, beating my rival. After getting cut on the SSN, I went north to Pewter where I grabbed the old Amber out of the museum, and HMO5, which, like in Pokemon Red, I never used because the Pokemon I assumed learned it doesn't in this generation. So instead, I bottled up my feelings and decided to take it out on Lieutenant Surge after getting my team up to level 4 his gym battle. I knew that Surge's Voltorb didn't have access to any moves that gave it stab in this generation, so for the first 2 turns of the match, I used Swords Dance on Dux. Then I was able to let off a Swords Dance boosted cut to knock out Voltorb, and once Pikachu was on the field, Dux survived a Thundershock and hit back with an even harder cut. Unlike in Red, where my water type was able to solo Surge's gym, a single Thundershock from Raichu was able to finish Dux off before he could make it a triple. Wanting my entire team to participate in some regard, I brought out Pennywise, while Surge used an X speed on Raichu. Pennywise was still able to get consecutive attacks in, but was knocked out by a critical hit Thunderbolt from Raichu. But, like Charmeleon, Raichu fell to a single dig from Babadook. 3 badges heavy in my pocket, my next stop was gonna have to be Rock Tunnel. In Rock Tunnel, I caught Freddy the Machop, and then spent way too long in Rock Tunnel off screen because I only have one Pokemon because I couldn't catch anything on Route 9 that I hadn't already caught to that point. After finally exiting the cave, I evolved Freddy into Machoke, but forgot to record, so here's the stat screen. I forgot to do the rival battle at this point, and went straight to Celadon where I caught a Vulpix. I started making a few mistakes around this point, like getting the Eevee off the top of the apartment building. I evolved it into Vaporeon, named it Entity, and then put it in the box until the Giovanni fight. Then I went and cleared out the fighting dojo to get Hitmonlee, but it's level 30 in this game, which is a level too high for Erika, so I had to box it. And finally, I funneled a bunch of money into the mob to buy a Dratini who I named Flag. I'm not going to use Dratini until the Elite Four, so I might as well have just saved my money and bought him then. Luckily, one of those mistakes ended up being fine. I used Vaporeon in the Giovanni fight because otherwise my team for Erika would have overleveled. Then I went to take on Erika, and right before used a Firestone to evolve Jack into Ninetales. Jack doesn't get access to Flamethrower until level 35 as a Vulpix, and not at all as a Ninetales. So, knowing he would never get above level 29, I ended up evolving him early to hope the evolution would be enough of a boost that Ember could get me through the next gym. For the most part, it did. Vileplume went down to a few embers with barely a fight, and the worst thing Tangela could do was bind me for 2 or 3 turns before I was able to break out and critical hit Ember it down. Unfortunately, Vileplume was able to put Jack to sleep on its first turn. So, not wanting to risk 6 full turns of inactivity, I swapped into Freddy, who also got put to sleep on his first turn. I decided to stay in on Freddy because I'm not using items, and he is less valuable to me in this battle than Jack, hoping that he would wake up and at least do some damage to Vileplume. However, that didn't happen. Vileplume easily knocked Freddy out, and I had to switch back to Jack. On switchin', Jack took a not insignificant amount of damage from Vileplume, but Vileplume ended up getting confused by its own move, so on the following 2 turns, while it hit itself in confusion, Jack was unharmed until he woke up, and then I was easily able to fold Vileplume like a sheet. Upon returning to the Lavender Tower and realizing I forgot to battle my rival earlier, I threw together a ramshackle team of 5 to take his on, but I only ended up using 3 because of how much heavy lifting Dux was able to do. Like, Samara was easily able to deal with Pidgeotto and the stat drop associated with constant sand attacks, but once Execute came out and put it to sleep, I swapped into Dux. With one fly, Dux was able to defeat Execute. Then, using 3 more flies, it beat Gyarados, and then finally finished off Kadabra with another fly, before I took him out of the match and swapped into Entity against Charmeleon. I then switched to Entity, who with a single Bubble Beam was able to easily defeat Charmeleon. I would have used Samara because this ended up being her last battle in the entire game, but she was still asleep and I didn't really want to risk her getting knocked out just so that I could use her one more time. After that fight, I went and grabbed Ghostface the Ghastly in the tower. While still in the tower, Ghostface evolved into Haunter. Then went on to go grab Hannibal the Snorlax, who, no matter how hard I tried, would just keep waking up after 1 turn before I finally got lucky and was able to catch him. In Silph, Ghostface evolved into Gengar. When I challenged my rival, I realized that he somehow was able to scale Silph without using a keycard because all the doors require one, but they were all closed before I came. That question threw me off enough that I started thinking about the old fan theory that Blue was a member of Team Rocket, and threw me off so much that rather than switch from Shorty to a Pokemon who could actually do anything against Pidgeot, I sent in Ghostface, who had no moves that could affect it. I luckily enough realized my mistake super early, so I swapped into Entity and was able to start getting in the groove, and by the end of my third Bubble Beam, Pidgeot had fallen. Against Execute, I swapped to Hannibal, but he had a Reflect setup, then he got paralyzed and was seated. After seeing that Body Slam could do about a third of Execute's health per attack, I swapped into Ghostface because I didn't want to risk Hannibal being paralyzed and having any damage it did negated by Leech Seed. For some reason, as soon as Ghostface came out, my mind became set on just using Lick to, I guess, try and paralyze Execute, when there was a much better option in Nightshade, which I even used at one point during the battle. Three Pokemon into the battle when Gyarados came out, I think I finally started to actually think about what I was doing, so I decided to use Nightshade against Gyarados. And it did quite a bit of damage, but Gyarados' Hydro Pump was doing a lot of damage despite how high Hannibal's special was, so Hannibal fell. I knew at this point that since Ghostface was done, I had to make sure that Entity could set up enough that Hannibal could clean up Alakazam. I ended up using Sand Attack 3 or 4 times while Alakazam continuously whittled down Entity's health. I only attacked the last turn that Entity was on the field because I knew that Alakazam would outspeed me and Entity wouldn't be able to get off another Sand Attack. I had to wrestle with Paralysis for the first 2 turns that Hannibal was on the field, but on the third turn I was finally able to get off a Body Slam that knocked out Alakazam. Then I just let Hannibal stay on the field, and after a few more turns of body slamming, Charizard went down without being able to do much of anything. Having beaten my rival, I grabbed La Llorona, the Lapras. What level do you think Lapras is? Just a badge ago, I got Entity in Celadon City at level 25, and here in Saffron, I got Shorty at level 30. More importantly, I had to battle my rival before I could even receive Lapras, and his ace Pokemon was level 40. Giovanni, who I'm about to fight, his ace is level 41, and the gym leader of this city, Sabrina's ace, is level 43. So how would you react if I told you that Lapras was level 15? The only Pokemon who you receive so late in the game that I think have a worse level are Kabuto and Omanite in Fire Red and Leaf Green, who are revived at level 5. And in Fire Red and Leaf Green, Lapras is level 25. If I wasn't using rare candies, the amount of time it would have taken me to get Lapras to the level of the rest of my team would have taken so long. But after finally getting Lapras up to level, I made a joke out of Giovanni with my 2 water types and moved on to Sabrina. I led Ghostface against Kadabra. I'm not going to say I redeemed all the misplays I made against my rival just a bit ago, but my strategy of using Lick actually paid off. Because Kadabra was so frail, 2 licks knocked it out. The battle between Shorty and Mr. Mime ended up being more of a trial of endurance than anything else. On Switch, Mr. Mime set up a light screen, which didn't affect Shorty, but then Shorty missed the first jump kick, taking a little bit of damage, but luckily, crit on the second. Then that pattern repeated with Shorty missing the first attack, then critting on the second, beating Mr. Mime. Then I brought out La Llorona against Venomoth. Venomoth only attacked with a pre-Gen 7 Leech Life, so it didn't do a lot of damage, and La Llorona was able to 2-shot it with Ice Beam. Being up front, I chose to battle Sabrina before Koga because I didn't know which Pokemon I'd get for Koga, and knew that the team I had for the Silph Co fights would probably be able to easily answer Sabrina. Also, I really thought that having Snorlax would be able to help with Sabrina, and as you can probably guess, Hannibal versus Alakazam was as much of a massacre as my battle with Giovanni that I didn't show you was. Hannibal was able to 2-hit Alakazam with Headbutt. After dropping off my team, I headed south of Lavender Town where I caught Patrick the Krabby and evolved him into Kingler. Then, at the bottom of Cycling Road, I caught Belial the Doduo, who I evolved into Dodrio. In the Safari Zone, I caught Annie, the Nidorina, and then failed one Chansey on camera, and four more when I had to go back to the Safari Zone later. Before facing Koga, I evolved Annie into Nidoqueen. With my team of three, Koga ended up being an absolute cakewalk. I used Patrick against his first two Pokemon, a Coughing and Muck. Before Generation 5, Crabhammer only had 85% accuracy, so it missed a few times, but it was made up for because, like Slash, it has a high critical hit ratio, so every time I made contact, I got a critical hit. So Coughing and Muck both went down in 2 hits. Between missing moves because of Smokescreen and rolling low, the second Coughing actually ended up being the hardest challenge of Koga's gym because of how much Annie was struggling against it. But Belial was able to make up for all the time I lost against Annie by 3-shotting Wheezing with Drill Peck and even got a critical hit on the last strike that was completely unnecessary. So it was time to set sail and not become the king of the pirates, but instead beat up an old man who uses fire types on an island. I set out to sea by surfing south from Pallet Town, where I found Thing the Tentacool, and immediately evolved him into Tentacruel. Upon reaching Cinnabar Island, I revived Mummy the Aerodactyl. Then, in the Pokemon Mansion, I caught Blob the Grimer, and actually have footage of it this time, and then I evolved him straight into Muck. The last thing I did on Cinnabar Island before battling Blaine was redeem myself by getting through his gym by getting every question correct. Against Blaine, I opened with Blob, and after seeing how little damage Hound did, I swapped to Sludge, which is Stab, and I should have done from the beginning because it almost knocked out Growlithe in one hit, and then the second one secured the win. Blaine swapped in his Ponyta, and I used Poison Gas but failed, and Blaine healed his full health Ponyta. Then I swapped to Mummy the Aerodactyl, who was immediately trapped by Fire Spin, and on the second turn of Fire Spin, Blaine used another Super Potion. I'm not sure why Blaine was so obsessed with healing his full health Pokemon, but after missing the first fly, the second landed a critical hit, and Ponyta went down. Blaine's third Pokemon was his Rapidash, and I swapped to Thing the Tentacruel, and with a single Surf, knocked the Fire Horse Pokemon out. Unfortunately for Blaine, I only had 3 Pokemon, so I let Thing stay in, and with a single Surf, knocked out his legendary Pokemon, securing me my 7th badge and forcing me to rebuild my team for Giovanni. From Cinnabar Island, I didn't catch anything on Route 20 and instead grabbed the strongest Pokemon in the Seafoam Islands, Norman the Seal, who, as you can probably guess, I immediately turned into a Dugong. Then I ignored routes 13, 14, and 15 and just grabbed a Tangela south of Pallet Town, who I named Bill, and set out to battle the last gym. Although I led with Norman, I knew there was a 100% chance that if he stayed in, he would sweep and I would never use Bill through the entire battle, so my first action against Giovanni was to swap to Bill. Tangela has a pretty respectable base 100 special attack, so even before Tangrowth, Tangela is fine enough, and with one absorb he took down Rhyhorn, and then 2 more to take down Dugtrio. I left Bill in to whittle down Nidoqueen for a while, but after 3 turns of Bind, I switched strategies and my first Slam missed, so Nidoqueen was able to get super effective poison damage in, and poison Bill, so the clock was ticking. And although he did quite a bit of damage to Nidoqueen, he reached his limit long before she did. Down to 3 HP, he successfully landed his last slam, fainted to poison damage, and left Norman to clean up. And clean up he did. The first thing Norman did was get revenge for Bill by using 1 Surf to take down Nidoqueen. When Nidoking came to the field, Norman stood his ground and with another Surf, got a second KO. Giovanni sent in his last Pokemon, and with a single Surf, Rhydon was washed away, I got my 8th badge, and was on the way to the Pokemon League. With 8 badges in my pocket, I started getting my team together for the Elite Four. First, I added Michael and evolved him into Venusaur, and then grabbed Flag, who I evolved into Dragonite. Then I used my Super Rod to catch Candy the Poliwag, who I evolved into Poliwhirl, and then traded for Lola the Jinx. I decided to surf to the power plant where I caught Chucky the Pikachu and used a Thunderstone to evolve him into Raichu. Finally, I went back to Cinnabar where I revived Pazuzu the Omanite. That's when things went horribly wrong. I dropped my keyboard and it loaded in my most recent save state, which was before Erika. I made a judgment call that since I still had Dratini in my back pocket, I evolved him all the way to Dragonite and used him to sweep my way up to where I had been, but I also made sure I caught every Pokemon I had caught to that point. That's why I had to go back to the Safari Zone and why I missed 4 more Chanseys, because somehow I found 4 Chanseys before I found a Nidorina. After retracing all of my footsteps and making sure my team for the Elite Four was still the same, I got everyone up to level and took on Hero outside of Victory Road. I treated this rival fight as a test to see how I do the final champion fight, and also sort of looked around, figure out which Pokemon would be best to add in Victory Road, as if I really had a choice. Since I'd already caught Zubat and Machop, who evolved into Machoke, that just left 4 Pokemon in Victory Road, and that's really 3 since Graveler and Geodude are both part of the same line, and it's even just 2 because Marowak's a 1% encounter. With that in mind, I finished my rival battle fairly easily. I did have Michael get knocked out by Charizard because I tried to Toxic when I really should have just gone for game way earlier. With my rival out of the way, I went straight into Victory Road where I caught my final catch of the game, Leprechaun the Onyx. That's his name, Leprechaun. Ignore what you might see on screen that may not look like Leprechaun, that says Leprechaun. Either way, I made it through Victory Road and made it all the way to the Elite Four, where I got my team up to their level, but unlike Red, didn't use any vitamins, so the coming fights ended up being way harder than they had to be because my team had no DVs. Despite all that, if you can count to 1, you can tell how my electric type battled through Lorelei's first 3 Pokemon. Dugong went down in 1, then Cloyster went down in 1, and finally, Slowbro went down in 1. Then she swapped in her Jinx, and rather than continue the pain train, I just paralyzed Jinx and swapped to Lola, who ended up struggling more than I expected, but not really through any fault of her own or mine. Lick and Psychic did quite a bit of damage, but Lorelei's Jinx got a critical hit on Body Slam that paralyzed Lola, and that paralysis led to Lola falling at the literal last second of the battle, forcing me to swap to Lep. Leprechaun was easily able to dispatch of Jinx, and then Lapras came out, and I stuck with Lep, who, despite doing a lot of damage with Rock Slide, was unlucky enough to have Lapras's Blizzard hit, which instantly knocked it out and forced me to bring in Michael, who was able to easily clean up Lapras with a critical hit Razor Leaf, beating Lorelei. Against Bruno, I opened with Lucky Lep, who crit Earthquaked his way through the first Onyx. Then I swapped to Lola, predicting an Ice Punch, but actually received a Thunder Punch. I retaliated with a Psychic to one-shot the punching Pokemon. I did the exact same thing to the following Hitmonlee, and then swapped in Lep against the second Onyx. On switch in, Bruno used an X defense, so while the first Onyx went down to a single critical hit Earthquake, Onyx number 2 would have taken 2 or 3, but a second X defense ensured that it would take 3, giving Bruno's Onyx just enough time to get off a Rock Slide before being knocked out. Then his final Machamp was OHKO'd by Lola. Agatha's team was the first one I really had any trouble with. Lep was easily able to dispatch of the first Gengar with an Earthquake, and Golbat took 2 Rock Slides to take down, but then Agatha brought out her Haunter, and Rock Slide did quite a bit of damage. I should have just gone for Earthquake probably to OHKO Haunter, but Agatha is one of the only trainers to switch Pokemon, so she swapped in her Arbok on my second Rock Slide, and then Arbok went down to Earthquake, Haunter came in. I remembered that Levitate doesn't exist in this generation, so I finished her Haunter off with Earthquake. Then my troubles actually began when I swapped Lola in against her ace Gengar. She was confused on swap in, and for the next 3 turns, hit herself in confusion consecutively, whittling down her health. On turn 4, I was finally able to get off a Psychic that, had I actually leveled up my Pokemon, probably would have beaten Gengar, but instead, the first just lowered its special, and then the second KO'd, finishing Agatha. Chucky was able to one-shot Lance's Gyarados with Thunderbolt, giving me hope for his performance against Hero. I swapped to Flag for Dragonair number 1, and Ice Beam took it and its sibling down in one hit. I let out Lord Pazuzu, and he tanked a Hyper Beam, and then with a single Hydro Pump dispatched its enemy, before I swapped to Flag against Lance's Dragonite. And unlike Lola, Flag was easily able to defeat its clone. Against the champion, I opened with Pazuzu, and after a disappointingly weak, yet still almost entirely critical hit Spike Cannon, I had to sit through his Pidgeot using Spike Cannon through Mirror Move before I was able to get off a Hydro Pump that knocked out my opponent's bird. I sent in Flag against Alakazam, and like Save Rock and Roll did to Sabrina's Alakazam in red, I took it out with a single Hyper Beam. Then, since I didn't have to recharge, I was able to swap straight to Michael against Rhydon. And my starter was finally able to do something by one-shotting his foe with a critical hit Razor Leaf. Lola came in 4th and struggled against Executor because while she had super effective moves, her special was too low to get over his without any DV investments. But she was able to take it out with the second move. Chucky was able to prove that my confidence wasn't misplaced by barely surviving a Hyper Beam and then retaliating with a one-hit Thunderbolt against my opponent's Gyarados. Finally, Hero brought out his Charizard and I brought out Lep. The two took some time getting to know each other by both missing their moves. Then, Charizard and Lep both traded damage. Charizard hit Fire Blast, almost knocking out Lep, but Lep survived, retaliated with a Rock Slide that instantly knocked out my opponent's Charizard, winning me the championship. With that, I beat Pokemon Blue, changing my team after every gym badge. The only change I would have made to my Elite Four team was probably adding Persian instead of Raichu, purely so that it wouldn't get boring when I use Pikachu in Pokemon Yellow. I am, however, a little disappointed in Lola the Jinx, purely because I've used Zinx, her counterpart in Fire Red and Leaf Green, on multiple teams, and she's been able to hold her weight far better than Lola did. I also would have gladly used Dux in place of Flag on my final team, purely because of how much of a goat he was through the rest of the battles, but I had already used him in a gym battle, so I didn't want to use him twice. One of the two lessons I'm going to take from this is use vitamins when you're using rare candies to grind instead of actually battling. That way your Pokemon can at least have some DV development or EV development in every game after Gen 3. The second lesson is going to be do research because, like in Pokemon Red, I didn't really look into which Pokemon were on which routes. Any future take on this challenge, I will probably do research. That way, I can at least have more than 2 Pokemon on my team when I'm fighting Koga, Sabrina, etc. I'd say this challenge was really good, but had some drawbacks. One of the best things about this is I'm using a bunch of Pokemon I don't normally use, like Dugong or Cantonian Muck or Sandshrew. But there's a big drawback to dropping every Pokemon after a gym battle. It meant that I really was being sent to the Pokemon Center a lot off screen whenever I was doing trainer battles in places that required them, especially in the Rock Tunnel. I think if anyone wanted to adapt this challenge into their own thing, they should probably take that into account just so they're not entirely relying on the one Pokemon they actually have access to, in my case it was Ducks, whenever they're going through an area. Unlike with Pokemon Red, where I ended up having to develop this challenge a bit more because of my experience, Pokemon Yellow's challenge was already kind of set in stone when I started this, so I don't plan to change much about it. My next upload's going to be Pokemon Yellow, but I can have absolutely no overlapping types, or even catch a Pokemon that shares a type with one of the ones I already have. I hope to see you there, remember to love yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.